Welcome to my podcast and YouTube channel, The Government Mechanic. I am your host, Dr. Lynn Sandra Kahn, and I am the Government Mechanic. Today we are launching Season 3 of our episodes, and we are beginning with Episode 17, Fighting for Family Rights. This whole month, 8 episodes will be devoted to the crisis in and abuses of our child welfare system that includes foster care, family court, family law, medical kidnapping, parental alienation. There is so much going on that impacts everyday Americans, and we almost never get to hear about it. So I am delighted that my guest is Rachel Bruno, who is a mother and family rights activist who had her children illegally taken from her in 2015. And I'm just going to let her tell her story.
Hi,
Hi,
Lynn.
Rachel. How's Tennessee?
Tennessee is cold, but not as cold as DC.
It is cold. Yes. Raining.
Yeah. But it's all good. Thank you for having me on.
Absolutely.
And as you stated, this happens way too often. Not enough people talk about it. So I am here to tell you my story.
Well, let's just get right into it. Rachel, tell us what happened to your family.
Well, both my children were seized in 2015 by Child Protective Services because my infant son was injured in the care of his nanny. Now, she did not tell me, right? I just woke up to a screaming baby at 4:00 in the morning. He was 7 weeks old, and I went into his room. He was crying, and she showed me an empty bottle, and she said he was really gassy. And I said, okay, fair enough. Babies get gassy. 6 hours later, with nonstop crying, would not eat, would not nap. What is wrong with this kid? I take him to the emergency room, and that's where I get the diagnosis that my son had a cranial fracture and an intracerebral blood hemorrhage. Doctors giving me all the liabilities. You against blood transfusions. Can we do this? Can we do that? I'm like, I don't care what you have to do to save my son. Save my son.
Yeah.
And off they go, wheeling my 7-week-old baby into emergency brain surgery. And I was just shocked, right? I was in shock. I went from a gassy baby to now my son is in brain surgery. 4 hours go by. Surgeon comes back. The neurosurgeon comes back. And he tells me everything went well clinically. We were able to drain the blood. We were able to fix the fracture. And my first question, is he going to be okay? Is he going to be brain damaged? And he tells me, we really don't know whether he's going to survive the next 48 hours. Due to his young age and the fact that he was having 15 seizures an hour following the surgery. Also received 3 bags of blood, 3 transfusions. So we have him in a medically induced coma right now until we can figure out the right cocktail to control his seizures. But he's stable. I will take you up to the room. So again, this whole morning was just like shot after shot at me, and I'm trying to wrap my mind around what happened. I go see my son. He's in that PICU, and if you've ever been in one of those rooms, everything is made of glass, very somber. I could hear the machines beeping. I could see tubes coming out of every orifice out of my son. And I just say a little prayer right there for my son. I said, God, I don't care if I have to take the rest of my life to take care of my son, I will. But don't take him away from me. And I had peace at that moment. He's in God's hands. No better place for him to be than in God's hands. I go into logistics mode from that point on, right? My mom is there. My 20-month-old son is there bouncing off the walls. My husband was on a flight from another state. He was flying for business. So I'm texting my husband what's going on. I'm texting my friend to pick up my mom, take my son. They're going to go sleep at grandma's house. I obviously wasn't leaving the hospital that night. And after everybody had left, I was just sitting there. And next thing I hear is a knock on this glass door. And I look up, and it's a man in a uniform and a lady with a clipboard. And he slides the door open. He says, Miss Bruno, can we speak to you? I said, yes. And he said, what happened to your son was worse than getting struck in the head by a bullet. Oh, God. I'm like, okay, what does that mean? And he said, we want to help you. Will you help us figure out how this happened to your son? And in my mind, I'm like, of course, You're here to help me. Obviously, it was the nanny. And at least that's what I thought. And I
Yeah.
sit down and I tell them everything. And little did I know, I was prime suspect number one.
Mm.
That this police officer and the social worker were building a criminal case against me without ever informing me of my rights or without ever telling me that this was a child abuse investigation.
Hmm.
Social worker proceeds to ask me if I have any other children. I tell her I do. Ask me what other ages, where are they? Tell her my son, David, 20 months old, sleep at grandma's house. And she says, is it okay if we go see him? And me thinking, again, I have nothing to hide. These people are here to help me. Go right ahead. She leaves at that point. Police officer stays with me and he starts questioning me. Why didn't you call 911? Because I thought he was gassy. She told me he was gassy. Why did you wait so long to bring him to the hospital? Because I thought he was gassy. Why did you bring him to hospital in Orange County when you live in LA County? Because this is the children's hospital that I know. And he's just jotting things down, and the detectives are on their way. He asked me to wait for the detectives. My husband arrives from the airport straight to the hospital. He grabs my husband to another room, tells me to go wait in another room, closes the door, wait for the detectives. So he's basically interviewing us separately. And the detectives don't show up until about midnight. And they question me until 2:00 in the morning. And I tell them, I really need to go get some sleep. I have epilepsy. I have seizures, which is one of the reasons I had a nanny to begin with, because one of the main triggers for my episodes are interrupted sleep or sleep deprivation. So they let me go, gave me their business cards. I went to sleep, wake up at about 10:00 that same morning, and my husband is just staring at me, like laser focused staring at me. And my first instinct is to look at the baby, like he's there, he's alive. What happened? And he said, they took David. I'm like, what do you mean they took David? Who? Where? Like, she lied to me. What? And he said, yeah, I've been calling all morning. They will not answer their phones. I don't know where he is. I call my mom. I'm like, what happened? And she said they showed up here at 2:00 in the morning with 3 police cars and walked into my house, woke David up, undressed him, looked for any signs of abuse, looked in the refrigerator, looked under the cabinets. Everything was fine. But then they look at me and say, we're taking him. And my mom said, no, you're not. And the social worker says, if you don't give him to us, you're going to get arrested. 3 police officers right there. Nobody says anything. And my mom says, if I go to jail, do I take him with me? Like, no, he's going to go to foster care and you're not going to be able to care for him because you're going to have a criminal record.
Mm.
So my son was seized at 2:00 in the morning, taken to who knows where. At this point, we had no idea. I start calling lawyers. I had to call about 10 different lawyers before I could find one who would deal with child protective services. Every
Mm.
lawyer is like, nope, I don't deal with that. Nope, I don't deal with that. Until I found
Mm.
one. And I'm still thinking, there's some miscommunication. I mean, something went wrong somewhere.
Yeah.
And I asked my lawyer, I'm like, okay, where's my son and where do I go get him? And he says, sit down. You have no idea what you're in for. I'm like, what are you talking about? They can't just come in here and get my kid. He's like, yes, they can. And I'm like, based on what? What happened to innocent until proven guilty? What about the Constitution? What about the nanny? And he says, this is family court. They don't follow constitutional law.
Family court does not follow constitutional law.
Yep. Those words will forever be ingrained in my head. Right.
Yep.
And as I sat there, I'm like, what other law is there? And he said, they can do whatever they deem is in the best interest of the child. So I start ranting. I'm like, how is it in the best interest of the child? Get my kid at 2:00 in the morning, take him to God knows where. And then he pounds his fist on the table. And he's like, listen to me. What happened to your son is criminal. You are facing 15 years in jail and $100,000 bail if they decide to charge you. You are not getting your kids back. If I go into that courtroom and I tell the judge to give the kids back to you, they're going to pull this up. And he shows me the criminal investigation. And they're going to say, Your Honor, this woman is under criminal investigation. You are placing the children at risk by giving them back to her. And if that happens, they're going to go to foster care. They're under 2 years old, nonverbal. They can be legally adopted by the foster family if the case lasts longer than 6 months.
Oh,
And they will make it last longer than 6 months.
of course.
And again, I am shocked. I'm like, what country is this? Jail? Adoption? No constitution? Like, what is this?
Yeah.
And he then tells me your saving grace is that your husband was out of state when this happened. So, legally speaking, your husband wasn't even at the crime scene. We're going to ask the judge to give sole custody to your husband. That way, they don't even risk going into foster care. But if the judge grants that, they're going to kick you out of the house.
Oh,
So, what choice did I have? Right? I told him, I'm
no
like,
choice. No
I don't
choice.
care what you put me through. No, just leave my children alone. So 72 hours later, we show up to the hearing, and I'm thinking it's going to be at least like Judge Judy, right? You talk, you talk,
Yeah.
you talk. And when I get there, the police officers aren't there, the social worker isn't there, the nanny is not there, the detectives aren't there. Nobody's on trial but me and a room with about 10 different lawyers.
Oh,
Lawyers that I don't even know are representing my children's interests. And they start talking, and I'm just waiting for the judge to ask me what happened. Like, when do I get to tell my side of the story? And next time I hear my name, Miss Bruno, any objections? I look at my lawyer, I'm like, what? And my lawyer says, any objections to the children being placed with their father? No. Mr. Bruno, any objections? No. Okay. Children will be placed with their father. Miss Bruno, you have 24 hours to vacate your home. You are court ordered to take child abuse classes, parenting classes, individual counseling, and a caseworker will be calling you regarding visitation. Court is adjourned. So within 15 minutes, they took everything away from me, right? They took my home away from me. They took my children away from me. And they essentially kicked my husband away from me because I couldn't have contact with him since he was with the children. And I'm like, what now? I tell my attorney, like, what the heck am I supposed to do now? Like, where am I supposed to go? And he says, well, as long as your son is in the hospital, they can't kick you out. It's a monitored facility. So I went to the hospital. I cleaned out my house and I spent the night at the hospital. Between the hospital, hotels, friends' houses, this went on for 40 days and 40 nights.
wow.
And in that child abuse class, I was thinking I'm going to be in there with a bunch of drug addicts, alcoholic, tattooed, pierced up, crazy people. And when I get there, I find that everybody was in the same boat that I was.
Wow.
Nobody had intentionally abused their child. There were bathtub accidents, there were playground accidents, there were disgruntled exes, there were some domestic violence issues, but nothing that warranted the removal and the separation and the trauma that the system causes to
Mm.
these families. There were rich,
And there is inflicted trauma. It is
absolutely,
traumatic and it
very,
lasts for a long time.
yeah, yeah. And I mean, there were rich people, there were poor people, there were white people, there were black people, there were young people, there were old people. I mean, there was across the board. So in that child abuse class is when, people telling their stories and you're like, they all sound like a script. They all sound the same. And like, why are they removing children from perfectly normal, sometimes a little quirky family who doesn't have a quirky family?
Yeah.
And that's when Dr. Google, right? I start researching and I remembered that when they seized my son, they took him to the county children's shelter and they would not release him to me or to my husband. They released him to my mom. My mom was a public school teacher. She was fingerprinted. She was a mandated reporter. So she was already in the system. And they gave him to her. And they asked her before we had a hearing, will you adopt your grandchildren? And my mom was
Wow.
like, no, give them back to their mom, who they belong. And social worker says, well, we don't know what the judge is going to order. If the judge orders the removal of the children, will you adopt them? And my mom's
Wow.
like, what happens if I don't? Yeah, they're going to go to foster care. So my mom signs adoption papers and she gets handed 2 checks for $680 each.
Wow.
The caseworker tells my mom, you'll be receiving $680 a month per child. They qualify for WIC, they qualify for food stamps, they qualify for Medicaid. And my mom's like, I don't want your money. And the caseworker tells her, well, this is how we help the families.
Oh. Oh.
Yes. So this went on,
Yeah.
going to the classes, doing all the services, what they call services, in order to prove my innocence, right? In order to get my children back. At the end of 6 months, after social services was making unannounced visits to my husband's house, right, and seeing how the children were. Monitored visitation. I had 7 hours a week of monitored visitation with both
Mm,
my sons.
your babies.
Babies. At the end of 6 months, it was the social worker recommendation that the case be closed. And thank God, right? But
Yeah.
when this was all said and done, I was around $250,000 in debt.
Wow.
My husband and I lost our business. We owned our own business at the time. We, living off of credit card debt, basically. And my criminal case was still open. That didn't close till for another year. But I had a fire up my butt. And I'm like, I didn't witness all this. I wasn't exposed to this to remain silent. And I want
Mm,
these people held accountable for what they did. So I called civil rights attorney. His name's Sean McMillan, lives in California, works out of California. And this is all he does is sue Child Protective Services.
wow. All he does is sue Child Protective Services.
Yep. All he
Wow.
does is sue the agencies. And he
To
said
take
a
care.
rehab case. He said it's based on 4th Amendment and 14th Amendment rights violations, right? 4th Amendment, illegal search and seizure. That does count to seizing someone's child.
Wow. Huh. Huh.
The 14th Amendment is the right for a family to raise, with minimal government interference. You should not be having government interference when it comes to family issues. So we sued them. We opened the case. We sued LA County. We sued Orange County. We sued the Children's Hospital. We sued the Sheriff's Department. We sued social services and all the individuals associated with each of those agencies that were involved in our case. And in December of 2018, we settled for $1.49 million.
Wow.
So the case was closed, gave me some redemption, able to at least give me a clean slate to wipe
Yeah.
off all the debt. But like my attorney told me at the time, turn the page. Now it's time for you to do what you really want, which is to tell your story and to advocate and create awareness about this issue.
And here you are
Here
doing just that.
I
What else do you want people to understand? People who are watching and listening, what else do you want people to understand about child welfare services?
want people to understand, first of all, that little tidbit that there is no constitutional law, right? People need to understand that there is no due process. It is not like a regular court where you think that there's evidence presented and that there's cross-examination and that, it's proven beyond a reasonable doubt that you did something and that your child is removed. That's not how it works. You are guilty until proven innocent.
Oh,
And the incentive behind this is a law called the Adoptions and Safe Families Act, which was signed by Bill Clinton in 1997, which incentivized the states with federal funding for every child that they removed and placed in foster care. So that little
so there's
check.
money that comes from the federal government when a county or whoever
Right.
takes a child from their parents.
Yep. And they only get the money if they remove the child. They
Well,
did not
we've
get
already
money.
talked about what you measure is what you get. So
Exactly. So
if
that
that's
little
what you're
check money
measuring and that's what, yep,
for
sorry.
$680, the state is getting anywhere between $2,000 to $8,000 per month per child.
Per child. The state gets from the federal government $2,000 to $8,000 per child taken away from families and put in foster care.
Right. And we
It's
have
a huge amount of money.
435,000 children in foster care right now nationwide. That
Wow.
is a lot of money.
Yes.
And where my case happened, LA County alone has a $2 billion budget for foster care and adoption.
Well, let me ask you, we're running out of time. Let me ask you two questions and I have some closing comments. So one is, how are your kids doing?
They are perfect, by the grace of God. My son, who had the injury, is now 9 years old. He's in 4th grade. He is reading, he's writing, he's perfect. My 20-month-old son is now 11, and he is in 6th grade. He's also reading and writing. And I forgot to mention, that when they took him, they did give him 13 vaccines without our consent. They forced him through a full skeletal survey without our consent. They gave him an anal wink test without our consent. And this is the type of things, the trauma right? Not only the
Yeah.
separation, but all the other stuff that they do to your child when they are wards of the state.
And then they say it's because we're trying to help families.
Right.
So it's just a basic lie. It's just all built on lies. Are there any changes that you can think of that you want to see at a federal level or a state level?
I mean, I would want this defunded if I could, right? If I had a magic wand and take this money out of Title 4E, which is out of the Social Security Act where all this funding comes out of. But there are smaller steps, right? We as citizens, we as the little people, we the people can do something. And that is to advocate for these families.
Yeah,
Growing up in church, I always thought foster care was like Make-A-Wish Foundation, right? That all these children had been abused and we should be the olive branch. We should be helping these children without ever realizing that nobody asks the question, should these children have been removed to begin with? And why were they removed? Was it a case of poverty, right? Was it a single mother? Was it a domestic violence situation where the mom is trying to leave, but she can't? And that's where we should be helping families, right? Not help to give money to strangers to raise your children, help the actual family so that they can
absolutely.
stay together.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that is, I think, part of some legislation that's being proposed about at least funding family advocates. So if you're caught up in a system, there's somebody there that can help you navigate that system.
Yes, absolutely. I have gone to DC and we have the bill called the Families of America or the Family Advocates of America Act. So that is being introduced in February. You can call your congressman and tell them you support this.
Say what that legislation is again?
It's called the Advocates for Families.
Advocates for families. Okay. Well, I want to close by saying two things. One is thank you. Thank you,
Absolutely. Thank you.
Rachel. I mean, I'm just so amazed at your courage and grace talking about this. It's just heartbreaking to hear. I'm glad it's working out. It's still heartbreaking to hear what happened, and blessings on you and your family.
Thank you.
The second thing I want to say is that if anybody listening or watching this is caught up in the child welfare system craziness and find themselves dealing with termination of parental rights or any of these issues, my biggest advice is go find your support group. You have to find people that you can talk to. And one place to look for resources is your website, which is thegiveroflight.org, which has resources on it. But I thought your blog is really, hearing it the first person, I think would be very helpful, especially your kind of amazement when you first met with your lawyer and he said, no constitutional rights in family court. So we'll put that link in the show notes for this. And thank you so much. And to our listeners and people watching, see you in episode 18. Thank you.
Thank you.